Hey guys, today we begin by drifting into a night where the sky itself seems to breathe. Above you, darkness is not empty. It is alive, quietly waiting. And then, without warning, the heavens ignite. Soft ribbons of light unfurl across the cold night sky, bending and stretching as if guided by invisible hands. Green melts into violet. Violet fades into red, and the silence feels heavier, deeper, almost sacred. You are not just looking at the sky. You are standing beneath a story that humanity has been telling itself for thousands of years. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in, feel free to leave a comment telling us where you are in the world and what time it is as you listen. Maybe you're lying in bed, lights off. Maybe you're on a late night drive or resting while the house finally sleeps. Wherever you are, you're part of this quiet moment now. Tonight, you're invited to slow down and look upward, not with urgency, but with curiosity softened by time. When ancient people first saw the northern lights ripple across the sky, they didn't reach for equations or instruments. They reached for meaning. They wondered who was moving up there, who was speaking, who was watching. To them, the sky was not a backdrop. It was a living realm, filled with intention, memory, and power. As you stand beneath those lights in your imagination, you begin to sense why. The aurora that does not behave like ordinary light. It flows. It pulses. It drapes itself across the stars like a veil being gently shaken. There is no sharp edge, no fixed shape, just motion, slow and deliberate, like a cosmic breath drawn in and released again. It feels personal, as if the sky has chosen this exact moment to reveal something only to you. Long before science offered explanations, the human mind filled that glowing silence with stories. These lights became spirits, warriors, ancestors, animals, gods. They were warnings whispered from above, or blessings spilling down from unseen worlds. Each culture that lived under auroral skies shaped the phenomenon into something familiar, something meaningful, something that fit into their understanding of life and death. Yet even as those myths took root, the lights themselves remained unchanged. They continued to appear when they wished, indifferent to fear or reverence. They danced during the long polar nights, stretching across frozen horizons, reflected in snow and ice, mirrored in dark water. Generations came and went, but the aurora endured, patiently waiting for new eyes to look up and wonder again. As you follow this trail of light through history, you begin to notice something gentle and profound. The need to explain the aurora was never just about understanding the sky. It was about understanding ourselves, our place beneath the vastness, our relationship with forces far beyond our control. The stories were a way of reaching upward, of bridging the immense distance between human fragility and cosmic scale. Over time, that reaching took a new form. Curiosity sharpened. Observation replaced fear. Instruments replaced rituals. Slowly, carefully, humanity began to ask different questions. Not who lives in the lights, but what creates them. Not what message they carry, but what journey brings them here. And in that shift, something remarkable happened. The aurora did not lose its beauty. It gained another layer of wonder, because knowing how something works does not strip it of magic. Sometimes it deepens it. As you continue to gaze upward in your mind, you begin to sense the dual nature of what you're witnessing. These lights belong to both worlds at once. The world of imagination and the world of physics. They are born from invisible forces, shaped by fields you cannot see, carried by particles that have traveled unimaginable distances just to meet the air above your head. And yet, when they arrive, they speak in color and motion, in a language that feels emotional rather than technical. You might notice how naturally your breathing begins to slow as you watch them, how the rest of the world fades into the background. This is not an accident. Humans have always responded to the aurora this way, with quiet attention, with awe softened into calm. There is something deeply soothing about watching the sky move without urgency, without noise, without demand. And so, tonight's journey unfolds gently. You will walk along two paths at once. One path winds through ancient beliefs, through whispered legends passed from one generation to the next under star-filled skies. The other path follows charged particles and magnetic fields, solar storms, and atmospheric layers. They run side by side, never truly colliding, never truly separating. As you move forward, you won't be asked to choose which path is more true. Instead, you'll be invited to see how both arise from the same human impulse, the desire to understand what lies above us, and how it touches our lives below. The northern lights do not rush, and neither will we. Wherever you are, let the world slow down for a while. Soften your gaze, let the hum of life around you fade, and gently drift with us into tonight's quiet exploration. You remain beneath the quiet sky, still carrying the echo of those ancient questions, when your attention gently shifts from wonder to observation. The lights above you are no longer just a mystery to be feared or worshipped. They are something you can describe, something you can slowly begin to understand. This is where the human mind naturally drifts next, not to take away the beauty, but to hold it more carefully. You start with the simplest question: what exactly are you seeing? The word often used is aurora, a name borrowed from the idea of dawn itself. When these lights appear in the northern half of the world, they are called the northern lights, or Aurora Borealis. When they glow in the far south, over icy oceans and distant continents, they become Aurora Australis. Different hemispheres, same phenomenon, two mirrors of the same cosmic process, quietly unfolding on opposite ends of the planet. As you watch, the lights refuse to stay still. They stretch into long curtains that ripple as if caught in a slow, invisible wind. Sometimes they form wide arcs that span the entire horizon, gently glowing like a bridge between one end of the sky and the other. Other times they break into thin strands, twisting and folding back on themselves, as though the darkness itself were breathing. The colors arrive softly, never all at once. Green is the most familiar, washing across the sky like diluted emerald light. It is calm, steady, almost comforting. But then, higher up, faint hints of red begin to appear, like embers floating above a fire. Purples and pinks flicker at the edges, subtle and fleeting, as if they might disappear the moment you focus too hard on them. On rare nights, deep blues briefly surface, cool and distant, before melting back into the dark. Nothing about this display feels rushed. The aurora moves at a pace that invites patience. You find yourself waiting, watching, letting seconds stretch into minutes without noticing. This slow rhythm is part of its power. Unlike lightning or meteors, the aurora does not startle. It calms. It draws you into a state where time feels less important. From the ground, the scale is difficult to grasp. These lights are not hovering just above the treetops or the mountains. They are unfolding far above you, high in the upper layers of the atmosphere. They stretch across hundreds, sometimes thousands, of kilometers, even though they appear close enough to touch. Your eyes instinctively misjudge the distance, turning vastness into intimacy. As you take this in, you realize why early observers struggled to place the aurora within their understanding of the world. It doesn't behave like clouds, stars, or fire. It has no obvious source. It arrives silently. It leaves without warning. There is no smoke, no heat, no sound you can rely on. Just light, suspended in darkness, moving with intention, but without explanation. Even today, standing beneath it feels slightly unreal. The aurora seems to belong somewhere else, to another layer of reality, just brushing against your own. You're still on solid ground, breathing cold air, feeling gravity hold you steady. And yet above you, something entirely different is happening, guided by rules you cannot see. This contrast is part of what makes the phenomenon so powerful. The earth feels stable, familiar, predictable. The sky, in this moment, feels alive. The aurora becomes a reminder that the planet you live on is not isolated. It is connected, open, constantly interacting with forces far beyond its surface. You might notice how the lights seem to follow invisible pathways, appearing most often near the poles, rarely near the equator. This pattern is subtle but consistent, a quiet clue that something larger is shaping where the aurora can exist. The planet itself plays a role, guiding and sculpting the display, even if you don't yet know how. As you continue watching, your sense of scale begins to shift again. The aurora no longer feels like a decoration painted onto the sky. It feels like a process in motion, something unfolding rather than something placed. The lights are not there for you. They are there because the conditions allow them to be. And yet, despite this growing understanding, the emotional response remains unchanged. You still feel small beneath the glowing arcs. You still feel that familiar mix of calm and awe, the sense that you're witnessing something rare and fragile, even though it has been happening for millions of years. This is the quiet tension at the heart of the aurora. It is both ordinary and extraordinary. It follows natural laws, and yet it feels like a personal gift. It exists whether anyone watches or not, but somehow feels more real when you do. As you stand there, letting the colors drift and fade, you begin to understand why people traveled great distances just to see this once in their lives. The aurora that does not shout, it whispers. And in that whisper, it invites you to listen, not just to the sky, but to your own sense of curiosity. The earth beneath your feet remains steady. The stars hold their fixed positions, but above it all, the aurora continues its slow, graceful motion, reminding you that even the most familiar world is layered with hidden movement. And somewhere between the ground and the stars, between certainty and wonder, you remain, watching, breathing, quietly awake. As your eyes remain fixed on the slow-moving lights, your thoughts begin to drift backward in time, carried far beyond instruments and measurements, into an age where the sky was not a system to be studied, but a realm to be inhabited. In the long, dark winters of the far north, people watched the aurora with the same quiet attention you feel now. But instead of asking how it formed, they asked who was passing overhead. In a world shaped by northern myths, the sky was alive with presence. Above the frozen landscapes, beyond the reach of human footsteps, powerful beings moved through unseen corridors. When the lights appeared, it was not random. It was a sign that something, or someone, was in motion. You imagine standing among those early observers, wrapped in thick furs, breath turning white in the air. The land around you is silent, locked in ice and shadow. Then the sky begins to glow. Green light spreads like fire across the stars, shifting and bending in slow waves. To the people watching, this could only mean one thing. The Valkyries were riding. They were not gentle figures. They were warrior maidens, fierce and watchful, moving between worlds. Their purpose was to choose the fallen from battle, guiding the bravest souls away from the chaos of the living world and into the halls beyond. When they rode across the sky, their armor shimmered, their shields flashed, their weapons caught the light, and that brilliance, reflected and magnified, became the aurora itself. As you follow this story, the movement of the lights suddenly feels different. Each ripple becomes the stride of a galloping horse. Each sudden flare becomes the clash of metal. The sky is no longer empty space. It is a battlefield above the world, echoing silently with decisions of fate. In these myths, the aurora was not meant to be approached lightly. To witness, it was to glimpse the machinery of destiny at work. It reminded those below that life was brief, fragile, and closely watched. Courage mattered. Honor mattered. The lights were a reminder that the line between worlds was thinner than it appeared. Your attention drifts higher still, toward the vast structure that held all these realms together. At the center of this mythic universe stood a colossal tree, its roots and branches stretching across existence itself. The world you lived in was only one of many, suspended along its trunk like a bead on a thread. This was the world tree, the silent axis around which everything turned. The aurora, in this telling, was not only the glow of armor and weapons. It was the reflection of something even larger. Some believed the lights shimmered from the great shields of the gods themselves, hung high in the branches of that cosmic tree. Others whispered that the glow came from distant realms brushing against the sky, their energies bleeding through into the human world. As you picture this, the aurora becomes a kind of mirror. It reflects a universe layered with meaning, where every flicker carries intention. The sky is not just above you. It is around you, connected to every choice, every life, every ending. What feels especially striking is how natural this interpretation seems when viewed through the eyes of those who live beneath it. In a world without artificial light, without constant noise, the sky dominated experience. Darkness was total. Silence was deep. When the aurora appeared, it broke that silence with motion alone, a message delivered without sound. The lights did not behave like fire, yet they burned. They did not behave like clouds, yet they flowed. They did not behave like stars, yet they shone. Faced with something so unfamiliar, the mind reached for the familiar shapes of story: warriors, shields, paths between worlds. Even fear found its place here. The aurora was beautiful, but it was also unsettling. Its sudden appearance could mean change. Its intensity could signal turmoil beyond human control. And so, people learned to watch respectfully, quietly, as you are now. They understood that some things were not meant to be challenged, only witnessed. As you linger in these ancient beliefs, you begin to feel how closely imagination and observation were intertwined. These stories were not careless fantasies. They were careful attempts to organize experience, to explain why the world behaved the way it did. The aurora became a bridge between what could be seen and what could be understood. And yet, beneath the stories, the lights themselves remained unchanged. They did not confirm or deny the myths built around them. They simply continued to move, indifferent to interpretation. To the sky, human meaning was optional. Still, there is something deeply comforting about knowing that others stood where you stand now, looking up at the same phenomenon, feeling the same mixture of awe and humility. The shapes may have been named differently, the causes imagined differently, But the emotional response was the same, a quiet recognition that the world extends far beyond the limits of human control. As the aurora slowly fades in your mind, the rider's retreating beyond the edge of vision. You are left with a sense of continuity. The stories may belong to the past, but the impulse behind them remains alive. Even now, with knowledge close at hand, part of you still wants to believe that the sky is speaking, and perhaps, in its own way, it is. The lights dim, the sky returns to darkness, but the memory of motion lingers, suspended somewhere between belief and understanding, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. As the glow in the sky softens and reshapes itself, your thoughts drift even farther north, toward lands where ice and darkness dominate most of the year. Here, beneath skies that stretch endlessly in nights that last for months, the aurora carried a different weight. It was not a spectacle, it was a presence, and to those who lived closest to it, the lights were never empty. You imagine standing on frozen ground, the air sharp and clean, the horizon barely distinguishable from the sky. The land feels ancient, shaped by wind and time rather than by human hands. In this quiet world, every movement matters. Every sound carries meaning. When the aurora appears here, it does not feel distant. It feels near, watching. Among Arctic peoples, especially those who live by the rhythms of ice, sea, and migration, the lights overhead were understood as something deeply personal. They were not abstract forces. They were family. They were memory. They were the continuation of life beyond the visible world. As you look up, the lights begin to sway gently, almost playfully. To these observers, that motion was not random. It was the movement of spirits, the souls of ancestors who had passed beyond the boundary of the living world, but had not truly left. They were still present, still aware, still part of the unfolding story of the land. Some believe the aurora was made of the spirits of animals as well. The seals, the whales, the reindeer, the fish, all the creatures that sustained life in a harsh environment. When these beings died, their essence did not vanish. It rose. It joined the sky, and there, in the form of shimmering light, it continued to move, to dance, to exist. This belief shaped behavior in subtle but powerful ways. The aurora was treated with respect, even caution. You were not meant to point at it carelessly. You were not meant to mock it or draw attention to yourself beneath it. The lights were listening. They were aware, and they could respond. You may notice how this changes the feeling of watching the sky. The aurora is no longer just something you observe. It is something that observes you in return. A quiet exchange takes place, unspoken but understood. You remain still. You lower your voice. You acknowledge the presence above without demanding anything from it. In some traditions, it was said that whistling beneath the aurora could attract attention, not always the kind you wanted. The spirits might descend, drawn by the sound, curious or playful, or even dangerous. Stories spoke of lights reaching downward, stretching closer to the ground, as if testing how far the boundary could bend. There were also accounts of faint sounds accompanying the aurora. Soft crackles, gentle pops, barely audible whispers carried on the cold air. Whether these sounds were imagined, misinterpreted, or real, they became part of the experience. The sky was not silent. It was communicating in a language too subtle to translate. As you sit with this idea, you begin to understand how closely survival and spirituality were linked in these regions. Life depended on balance between humans and animals, between seasons, between visible and invisible forces. The aurora became a symbol of that balance, a reminder that nothing truly disappeared. It only changed form. Death, in this worldview, was not an ending. It was a movement upward, a shift into another layer of existence. The lights above were proof that connection endured beyond the physical world. Ancestors were not gone. They were present in the sky, watching over the land, guiding those below. This belief carried comfort as much as caution. In a place where life could be lost quickly to cold or hunger, the idea that the dead remained close brought reassurance. The aurora became a sign that the world was not indifferent. It remembered. It responded. As you continue watching, the lights seem to echo this closeness. They move in small, deliberate gestures. They brighten, then dim, as if reacting to something unseen. You might even feel a quiet urge to acknowledge them, not with words, but with stillness. What stands out is how different this interpretation feels from the distant warriors and gods of other myths. Here, the aurora is not a symbol of power beyond reach. It is intimate, familiar. It belongs to the same cycle of life that governs the sea, the animals, and the people themselves. And yet, despite this closeness, there remains a boundary. The lights stay in the sky. The living stay on the ground. The connection is felt, but never crossed. Respect lies in knowing where you stand. As the aurora slowly fades again, its presence does not vanish completely. It lingers in memory, in behavior, in quiet moments of awareness. Even when the sky is dark, the sense of being watched over remains. You breathe out slowly, feeling the cold air fill your lungs. The land is still, the sky is calm, but the idea takes root that above you, beyond sight, something continues to move, to observe, to exist. And with that thought, the journey carries you onward, deeper into the many ways humanity has tried to understand the light that dances where the world seems to end. The quiet carries you onward, eastward now, across frozen forests and endless snowfields, into regions where the night sky feels closer to the earth. Here, the aurora takes on a different shape in the human imagination, not as warriors or ancestors, but as living creatures, swift and playful, leaving trails of light behind them as they run. You picture the landscape first. Snow stretches unbroken to the horizon, reflecting even the faintest glow from above. Trees stand motionless, their branches heavy with frost. The cold is deep, but not hostile. It feels patient. In this stillness, when the aurora appears, it does not descend from the heavens. It seems to leap. Among northern peoples of this land, the lights were known as firefoxes. You imagine them racing across the hills, their paws barely touching the snow, their bodies too quick to see clearly. As they run, their long tails sweep through the air, striking the surface of the sky itself. Each flick sends sparks upward, scattering glowing dust across the darkness. Those sparks hang and stretch, becoming the luminous ribbons you see above you now. This story fits the movement perfectly. The aurora rarely glides smoothly for long. It jumps, it flickers, it snaps suddenly from one shape into another. Watching it feels less like watching clouds and more like following something alive, something curious and restless. The fox does not move with purpose. It moves with instinct, and so does the light. In this telling, the aurora is playful rather than solemn. It is mischievous. It appears without warning and vanishes just as suddenly, leaving behind only memory and quiet. There is no threat here, no judgment, just motion and energy released into the sky for its own sake. As your thoughts drift farther across the northern world, the meaning of the lights shifts again. In vast regions where people followed the migrations of animals and the rhythms of open land, the aurora became tied to ideas of life's fragility and renewal. It was seen as the presence of spirits too young to remain, or forces still finding their place in the universe. Here, the lights were not always comforting. Sometimes they were a reminder of loss, of lives that ended before they could fully unfold. The sky carried those stories gently, transforming grief into motion, into something that could be witnessed without pain. The aurora became a place where sorrow did not stagnate. It moved, it changed, it softened. In other stories, the lights were signs of creation and conflict unfolding beyond human sight. The sky was not peaceful, it was active. Forces collided, energies clashed. What you saw was not the event itself, but its echo, light spilling through the seams of the world as unseen struggles played out above. As you sit with these interpretations, you begin to notice a common thread. No matter the culture, the aurora was rarely passive. It was always doing something, running, fighting, playing, remembering. Even when the meaning differed, the impulse to animate the lights remained the same. Humans instinctively sensed that still explanations could not capture moving light. There is also a quiet acceptance woven into these stories. The aurora is not something you control. You do not summon it. You do not chase it. You wait. You watch. And when it arrives, you receive it as it is. This attitude reflects a deeper understanding of life in harsh environments, where patience and observation matter more than force. The fox runs its course and disappears into the dark. The spirits drift back into silence. The sky closes its door without explanation, and life continues below, unchanged but subtly affected. As you watch the lights ebb and flow, you feel how these stories soften fear. They turn the unknown into something approachable, even gentle. A creature running across the sky is easier to accept than a meaningless burst of light. A playful force feels safer than a random one. And yet, beneath these comforting images, the aurora remains what it has always been: distant, untouchable, operating on rules far beyond human design. The stories do not bind it. They simply sit alongside it, offering a way for the mind to rest. The lights thin now, stretching into faint traces before fading completely. The fox disappears beyond the edge of the world. The sky returns to darkness, and the cold settles back into stillness. But something has shifted. The aurora is no longer just light. It carries motion, intention, and quiet life within it, at least in the imagination. And that imagined life, fragile and fleeting, mirrors something deeply human. As the darkness deepens once more, you sense that these stories are not fading relics. They are reflections of a timeless instinct to see life where there is movement, to find meaning where there is mystery, and to feel less alone beneath a vast, glowing sky. As the last traces of motion dissolve back into darkness, a quieter meaning settles in. The aurora is no longer running, fighting, or dancing. It becomes something subtler, a sign, a message written across the sky, meant not to entertain, but to warn, to reassure, or to prepare those below for what might come next. You imagine living in a time when the future was never guaranteed. Seasons could turn cruel without notice. Crops could fail. Storms could arrive without warning. In such a world, the sky was more than scenery. It was a source of information. When something unusual appeared there, people paid attention. The aurora, with its sudden intensity and unfamiliar colors, naturally became woven into ideas of fate. A bright, restless display could be interpreted as a sign of upheaval, conflict on the horizon. illness spreading, balance breaking somewhere beyond sight. When the lights flared violently, shifting rapidly and filling the sky, they seemed to mirror unrest below. The world above and the world below felt linked, as though tension in one echoed through the other. Yet the interpretation was not always dark. In many traditions, a calm, flowing aurora carried hope instead. Gentle light was seen as a blessing, a sign that unseen forces were aligned in favor of growth and renewal. Fields would flourish, animals would return, life would continue its cycle without disruption. The same phenomenon could comfort or unsettle, depending not only on its appearance, but on the moment in which it arrived. As you reflect on this, you realize how deeply human perception shapes meaning. The aurora itself does not change its intention. It has none, but the people watching project their own uncertainty onto it. Fear becomes omen. Peace becomes promise. The sky becomes a mirror, reflecting the emotional state of those who look up. What emerges is a worldview where nothing exists in isolation. The earth, the sky, the human heart, all are part of a single system, constantly influencing one another. When the aurora appears, it seems to confirm that belief. It suggests that forces beyond human reach are still intimately connected to human experience. This sense of connection is powerful. It gives structure to uncertainty. It turns randomness into narrative. Instead of chaos, there is meaning. Instead of helplessness, there is interpretation. Watching the sky becomes an act of participation rather than observation. You might notice how this way of thinking blurs the boundary between the natural and the spiritual. The aurora is not separate from life. It is part of it, a signal woven into the fabric of existence, reminding people that they are not alone in the universe, even when they are small within it. As the lights fade and return across generations, this belief system deepens. Children grow up hearing that the sky watches over them. Elders pass down stories that tie human behavior to cosmic response. Respect for nature becomes respect for the unseen. Carelessness becomes dangerous, not because of punishment, but because it disrupts harmony. From this perspective, the aurora is not just an event. It is a relationship, one that must be acknowledged, interpreted, and honored. Looking up is an act of humility. The sky is vast. Human life is brief. The light reminds you of both. You may feel how comforting this worldview can be, especially in a fragile world. If the sky carries signs, then the universe is paying attention. If events above reflect events below, then existence is not random. It is patterned, even if the pattern remains unclear. And yet, quietly, another shift is approaching. A different kind of curiosity is beginning to form, one that still looks up but asks different questions. Not what does this mean for us, but what causes this to happen at all? For now, though, you remain in this space of interpretation, where meaning flows as freely as light. The aurora becomes a thread tying human life to cosmic motion, fate to fire, earth to sky. The night deepens, the air grows still, and above you, even in darkness, the sense remains that the universe is alive with signals, waiting to be read, waiting to be understood. As the quiet beliefs of omen and destiny slowly take root, something else begins to stir beneath the surface of human thought. It is subtle at first, almost indistinguishable from myth itself, a desire not just to interpret the sky, but to measure it, to name it, to observe it repeatedly, and see if its behavior follows patterns rather than moods. You find yourself standing at the edge of a changing world. The aurora still appears as it always has, silent, luminous, untouchable. but the eyes watching it are beginning to change. Curiosity is turning outward instead of upward. Questions are no longer aimed at unseen beings, but at the light itself. At some point, the aurora receives a name that reflects this shift. It is linked not to spirits or animals, but to the idea of dawn, the moment when darkness yields to light. The choice is telling. The aurora is no longer framed as an interruption of the night, but as part of a natural cycle, a phenomenon that belongs to the sky rather than rules it. Early observers begin to record what they see, not in stories passed around fires, but in notes, sketches, and careful descriptions. They notice where the lights appear most often. They notice that they favor the far north and south, rarely visiting lower latitudes. They notice that certain nights bring stronger displays than others, and that these nights sometimes cluster together, separated by long periods of calm. You can sense the patience required for this kind of watching. The aurora does not appear on command. It cannot be summoned for study. Those who wish to understand it must wait, sometimes for years, for the sky to cooperate. And when it does, they must be ready, alert, attentive, restrained. This new approach does not erase myth overnight. The old stories linger, woven into culture and memory, but alongside them grows a parallel way of thinking, one that seeks causes rather than messages, mechanisms rather than meanings. In this emerging mindset, the aurora becomes a problem to be solved. Why does it glow? Why does it move? Why does it change color? Why does it appear where it does and not elsewhere? Each question leads to another, stretching curiosity further from the familiar ground of legend. What is remarkable is how hesitant this transition is. There is no sudden declaration that the sky has been conquered by knowledge. Instead, understanding advances slowly, respectfully, almost cautiously. The aurora resists easy explanation. It behaves unlike ordinary light. It does not burn fuel. It produces no smoke. It appears high above weather and clouds, detached from the processes people already understand. For a long time, even those committed to observation struggle to place it within any known category. Is it a kind of fire? A reflection? An electrical effect? A disturbance in the upper air? Each theory explains part of the experience, but none explain it fully. As you imagine these early thinkers, you feel the tension they must have carried. They stood between two worlds, one shaped by inherited meaning, the other by emerging evidence. To abandon myth entirely felt premature. To cling to it exclusively felt limiting. The aurora hovered above both positions, unresolved. And yet, something important happens in this space of uncertainty. The sky becomes approachable, not in the sense of control, but in the sense of dialogue. Humans begin to believe that the universe operates according to rules that can be discovered, even if they are complex and hidden. This belief is transformative. It reframes mystery not as a wall, but as an invitation. The aurora no longer marks the boundary of understanding. It marks the frontier. You may notice how this shift mirrors something familiar within yourself. The moment when wonder turns into inquiry, when awe deepens rather than fades, when beauty becomes not less magical, but more meaningful because it can be traced layer by layer to its source. As the centuries pass, tools improve. Measurements become more precise. Records accumulate. Patterns begin to emerge where once there were only isolated moments. Slowly, the aurora is drawn into a larger framework, one that includes the planet itself, the space around it, and eventually, the star that sustains all life below. But that realization has not arrived yet. For now, the aurora remains suspended between poetry and physics, belonging fully to neither, resisting reduction to a single explanation. The night sky remains vast. The lights still dance without sound, and you, standing beneath them in this moment of transition, can feel the quiet excitement of a world on the verge of understanding something profound. The myths have not been erased. They have simply made room. Your attention drifts farther outward now, beyond the quiet patience of observation, beyond the thin shell of air surrounding the planet. The question that has been forming slowly finally finds its direction. If the aurora is not born from spirits or omens, if it follows patterns rather than moods, then its origin must lie somewhere beyond the earth itself. You lift your gaze and your imagination past the upper atmosphere, past the invisible boundaries that once felt unreachable, and toward the nearest star. It hangs in the sky by day, familiar and unassuming, warming the surface below with such consistency that it is easy to forget its true nature. But beneath that steady light, something restless is always at work. The sun is not calm. It is not static. It is a vast, seething sphere of energy, held together by gravity and driven by reactions so powerful they defy everyday intuition. At its core, matter is transformed continuously, releasing immense amounts of energy that push outward in all directions. What reaches the earth as gentle warmth begins as unimaginable intensity. You begin to sense the scale of this process. The sun's surface is alive with motion, swirling currents, rising and falling flows, regions of intense magnetism twisting and knotting themselves into complex patterns. These invisible forces shape what happens next, determining when the sun remains quiet and when it becomes active. Sometimes, dark patches appear on its surface. These regions are cooler than their surroundings, but far more energetic in another sense. They are places where magnetic forces are tightly wound, storing enormous tension. When that tension shifts or breaks, the release can be sudden and dramatic. Streams of charged particles are constantly flowing outward from the sun, carried by what is known as the solar wind. You cannot see it, you cannot feel it, and yet it never stops. It fills the space between planets, rushing past worlds silently, carrying energy far beyond its source. At times, the sun becomes more restless. Bursts of activity hurl vast clouds of energized particles outward into space. These events are not explosions in the familiar sense, but powerful releases, waves of matter and magnetism racing away from the sun at incredible speeds. They expand as they travel, spreading across millions of kilometers. You imagine this invisible tide moving through the darkness of space, crossing the immense distance between the sun and the earth. It does not aim for the planet. It simply expands, indifferent, unstoppable. Most of the time, it passes by with little effect, but sometimes the timing aligns. When that surge of energy reaches Earth's neighborhood, something remarkable happens. The planet is not defenseless. It is wrapped in an invisible shield, shaped by forces deep within its core. This shield bends and redirects much of what arrives from space, protecting the surface from direct impact. Yet protection does not mean isolation. The interaction between these solar forces and the planet's shield creates movement, tension, and flow. Energy is guided, funneled, and reshaped rather than blocked entirely. And in that interaction, the stage is set for light to be born. As you sit with this idea, the aurora begins to feel less like an isolated miracle and more like a consequence of connection. The Earth is not a closed system. It is part of a larger conversation, constantly exchanging energy with its star. The lights in the sky are not random visitors. They are responses. This realization carries a quiet shift in perspective. The sun is no longer just a source of daylight. It becomes an active participant in events that unfold far above the surface of the planet. Its moods, its rhythms, its outbursts ripple outward, touching worlds across vast distances. And yet, from where you stand, none of this feels violent or chaotic. The aurora remains soft, graceful, slow. It is the visible edge of an invisible process, where immense power has been transformed into something gentle enough for human eyes to rest upon. You may notice a subtle sense of humility settling in. The light that once inspired stories of gods and spirits now reveals a different kind of wonder, one rooted in scale and interaction rather than intention. The universe does not need to mean anything in order to be extraordinary. Above you, the sun continues its restless work, unaware of the delicate beauty that sometimes results from its activity. And far below that star, the earth waits, shielded yet open, ready to turn incoming energy into motion, color, and light. The aurora, it seems, begins long before it ever touches the sky. Now your thoughts follow that invisible surge as it leaves the restless surface of the sun behind and begins its long passage through space. The distance between the sun and the earth is vast beyond everyday comprehension, a stretch of darkness so wide that light itself takes minutes to cross it. And yet, the stream of charged particles moves steadily onward, carried by momentum and guided by forces older than life on the planet below. You imagine this journey unfolding in silence. There is no sound here, no sense of speed you can feel, just motion through emptiness. The particles spread outward like an expanding breath, thinning as they travel, weaving through a region shaped by gravity and magnetism rather than air or weather. Most of the time, this flow is gentle, almost background noise in the structure of space. But sometimes, it carries more energy, more urgency, as if the sun has exhaled more deeply than usual. As this invisible wind approaches Earth, something subtle begins to happen. The planet announces its presence not through sight, but through influence. Long before the particles reach the atmosphere, they encounter an unseen boundary, a region where Earth's own forces begin to assert themselves. This boundary is not solid. It does not block passage. It redirects. Earth is wrapped in a magnetic envelope, shaped by movements deep within its core. From space, this field stretches outward like a vast, elongated bubble, compressed on the side facing the sun and trailing far behind on the opposite side. It is a structure formed entirely of force, invisible yet powerful, constantly reshaped by what flows into it. As the solar particles meet this magnetic field, their paths bend. Instead of continuing straight ahead, they spiral and curve, guided along invisible lines that arc gracefully around the planet. You can think of it as a quiet negotiation between two energies, one arriving from the sun, the other rising from within the earth. Most of this incoming flow is deflected away, sliding around the planet and continuing on into space. This is the shield at work, doing its job without drama. But not all particles are turned aside. Some become trapped, caught by the structure of the magnetic field itself, forced to follow its curves rather than escape them. These captured particles begin a new journey, one that draws them closer to the planet rather than pushing them away. They spiral along magnetic pathways, gradually descending toward the regions where those invisible lines converge. And where do they converge? Near the magnetic poles. You may notice how naturally this explains something you've already observed. The aurora does not appear everywhere. It favors the high latitudes, clustering around the polar regions like a crown of light. This is not coincidence. It is geometry. It is structure. The planet itself is shaping where the light can exist. As the particles funnel downward, their motion accelerates. They gain energy, not from fuel or flame, but from movement guided by force. The closer they draw to the upper atmosphere, the more concentrated they become, gathering like a quiet storm forming far above the clouds. From the ground, none of this is visible yet. The sky still looks dark. The stars still hold their places. But high above, in regions you cannot see, a convergence is taking place. Two worlds are about to meet, the stream from the sun and the breath of Earth's atmosphere. This moment carries a strange kind of elegance. The aurora is not created by impact alone. It is created by guidance. The particles are not crashing blindly into the planet. They are being led carefully along paths traced by invisible lines that have existed for billions of years. You begin to sense how deeply interconnected this process is. The sun's activity, the Earth's inner dynamics, the shape of space itself, all are involved. Remove any one piece, and the light would never appear. As the particles descend further, the atmosphere begins to thicken around them. Individual atoms and molecules drift closer together. The stage is almost set. The journey that began in the heart of a star is about to reach its visible conclusion. You remain below, unaware of the precise moment when light will finally bloom. But the conditions are aligning. Energy is gathering. Motion is tightening into focus. And soon, in the quiet sky above, the invisible will turn luminous. High above you now, far beyond the reach of weather and clouds, the journey reaches its most delicate moment. The charged particles, guided so patiently by invisible paths, finally enter the upper layers of the atmosphere. Here, the emptiness of space gives way to something thin but present, a region where Earth's air begins to exist, sparse and quiet, yet ready to respond. You imagine this meeting taking place in near silence. There is no explosion, no collision you would recognize from everyday life. Instead, there is contact, a gentle but energetic encounter between visitors from the sun and the atoms that belong to Earth. It happens in a realm too high for birds, too thin for aircraft, a place that feels almost like the edge of the planet's breath. As the particles rush downward, they encounter atoms of oxygen and molecules of nitrogen drifting slowly in the upper atmosphere. These atoms are calm, balanced, holding their energy in steady configurations. When the incoming particles arrive, they transfer some of their energy, nudging these atmospheric atoms out of their quiet state. This is the moment where motion becomes light. The atoms do not hold on to that extra energy for long. They cannot. Instead, they release it almost immediately, returning to their original state. But when they do, the energy leaves in a form your eyes can see. It leaves as light, soft, colored, and fleeting. You begin to understand that the aurora is not a surface phenomenon. It does not sit on the sky like paint on a canvas. It exists in layers, unfolding at different heights, each altitude shaping the glow in its own subtle way. Some light forms higher up, where the air is thinner and interactions last longer. Other light blooms lower, where collisions happen more quickly and fade sooner. The process repeats itself millions of times across vast regions of the atmosphere. Each individual interaction is tiny, almost insignificant on its own, but together they create sweeping curtains of illumination, synchronized not by design, but by shared conditions. countless microscopic events merging into one macroscopic display. You might picture this as a kind of cosmic choreography. The incoming particles provide the rhythm, the atmosphere provides the dancers, and the magnetic field provides the stage upon which everything unfolds. None of it is intentional, and yet it feels perfectly arranged. What is striking is how gentle the final result appears compared to the forces involved. These particles began their journey in violent conditions, born from intense solar activity, accelerated across unimaginable distances. And yet, when they finally reveal themselves to you, they do so softly, as slow-moving waves of color drifting across the sky. This gentleness is part of why the aurora feels calming rather than alarming. Your mind senses motion, but not threat. Change, but not danger. The light invites observation, not reaction. It asks nothing from you except attention. As the interactions continue, the shapes of the aurora begin to make more sense. Long vertical curtains form where streams of particles follow magnetic lines downward. Rippling folds appear where those lines shift and sway. Sudden bright flashes mark moments when energy flow briefly intensifies, then relaxes again. Everything you see is temporary. Each glow lasts only fractions of a second before fading, replaced by another nearby. The aurora is never static because the process creating it is never still. Energy flows in, energy flows out. Balance is constantly being restored. And through it all, you remain grounded, breathing slowly, watching a process that connects star and planet without ever touching the surface below. The atmosphere absorbs the encounter, translating raw energy into beauty, shielding life beneath from harm. In this way, the aurora becomes a quiet demonstration of transformation. Power does not always arrive as destruction. Sometimes it arrives as light, softened and reshaped by the conditions it encounters. As you continue to watch in your imagination, the sky seems to breathe again, illuminated from within by processes you cannot feel but can finally see. The universe has brushed against the earth, and the earth has responded, not with force, but with color. As the light continues to unfold above you, your attention naturally drifts towards colors. They are never random, even though they feel spontaneous. Each shade carries information, quietly revealing what is happening high above, in regions you will never visit. You're deeply connected to. You notice the green first. It is the most common, the most recognizable, and often the most calming. It spreads smoothly across the sky, forming wide arcs and gentle curtains that seem to hover in place before slowly dissolving. This green glow comes from oxygen, present in the upper atmosphere, releasing energy after being disturbed. It appears at heights where the air is thin but not empty, a layer where interactions linger just long enough to paint the sky with soft light. Higher still, the green sometimes fades into red. This red is not fiery or urgent. It is subtle, faint, and often overlooked unless the sky is especially dark. It emerges from oxygen as well, but under different conditions: higher altitude, thinner air, slower interactions. Here, energy takes longer to be released, and the resulting light spreads gently, like a distant ember glowing in the cold. You might find this contrast soothing. The same element, responding differently depending on where it is and how it is touched, produces entirely different colors. It is a reminder that context matters, that even simple components can behave in complex ways when placed in different environments. Then there are the cooler tones. Purples and blues appear lower in the sky, often at the edges of brighter displays. These colors come from nitrogen, a major component of the atmosphere, responding quickly and energetically to incoming particles. The light flashes briefly, sharp and vibrant, before fading. It is fleeting, almost shy, as if it were never meant to linger. Pink hues emerge where these colors overlap, where nitrogen and oxygen glow together, blending their emissions into something softer, more delicate. These moments are brief, appearing and disappearing as the balance of energy shifts. They feel like secrets the sky shares only for an instant. As you watch these colors shift and mingle, you realize that the aurora is layered not just in space, but in time. Each color marks a slightly different process, happening at a slightly different height, unfolding at a slightly different pace. What your eyes perceive as a single moving form is actually a complex stack of interactions, unfolding simultaneously above you. This complexity does not demand analysis. It invites quiet appreciation. You don't need to identify each color to feel its effect. The mind registers harmony even without understanding every note. The sky becomes a slow-moving composition, guided by rules but experienced as emotion. There is something deeply grounding about knowing that the colors are not decorative. They are signals, honest responses to energy entering the atmosphere. Nothing is added for effect. Nothing is exaggerated. What you see is exactly what is happening, translated into a language of light. This knowledge does not diminish the beauty. If anything, it enhances it. The sky is not performing. It is reacting. And in that reaction, it creates something more expressive than intention ever could. As the aurora gradually dims and brightens again, the colors soften, then intensify, like breath moving in and out. Your awareness follows this rhythm, slowing along with it. Thoughts stretch. Time loosens its grip. Above you, oxygen and nitrogen continue their quiet exchange with arriving energy, glowing briefly, then returning to stillness. Below you, the world remains unchanged, protected, held in balance by processes that rarely announce themselves so visibly. You remain where you are, watching colors born from invisible encounters, feeling the calm that comes from witnessing complexity unfold without urgency. The sky has shown you its palette, and now, gently, it begins to fade once more, preparing for the next phase of its silent story. As the colors recede and the sky settles back into darkness, you become aware of something quietly remarkable. Even an event as unpredictable and fleeting as the aurora is no longer entirely left to chance. Over time, humans have learned not only how it forms, but when it is more likely to appear. The lights are still wild, still free, but they leave traces, signals that attentive watchers have learned to read. You imagine people waiting beneath cold skies, not with rituals or offerings, but with patience and preparation. Eyes train upward, instruments quietly humming, screens glowing softly in the dark. These modern observers are not trying to summon the aurora. They are listening for its approach. Far from the polar night, satellites circle the Earth endlessly, monitoring the space between planet and star. They watch the sun for signs of unrest, measuring subtle shifts in its activity. When solar energy surges outward, those movements are tracked, calculated, and translated into forecasts. Not predictions in the strict sense, but probabilities, gentle suggestions that the sky may soon awaken. One of the tools used to express this likelihood is a simple scale, a way of describing how restless the space around Earth has become. Higher values suggest stronger interactions, greater disturbances in the magnetic environment. To those who know how to read them, these numbers are not abstract. They are invitations. They whisper that the night ahead may hold something special. Yet even with this knowledge, nothing is guaranteed. The aurora remains selective. It may bloom brilliantly or refuse to appear at all. Clouds may intervene. Conditions may shift at the last moment. This uncertainty is part of its character. The science does not tame the phenomenon. It only narrows the window through which it might be seen. You begin to notice how observation itself becomes a quiet ritual. People travel to high latitudes, seeking places where darkness lingers long and artificial light fades away. Remote coastlines, snow-covered plains, forests hushed by winter. These locations offer more than visibility. They offer silence, the kind that allows subtle motion in the sky to feel immense. There is a season to this waiting. The aurora favors long nights, when the sun stays below the horizon and the sky remains dark for hours at a time. In these extended nights, patience is rewarded more often. The lights have space to unfold slowly, without interruption. You imagine photographers standing still for long stretches, cameras pointed upward, hands numb from cold. They are not chasing action. They are capturing stillness and motion. Long exposures gather faint light, revealing structures too subtle for the naked eye to fully grasp. The result is not exaggeration, but translation, a way of sharing what the sky is quietly doing when watched carefully. In these moments, science and appreciation blend seamlessly. Data guides people to the right place at the right time, but the experience itself remains deeply personal. No forecast can replicate the feeling of seeing the aurora for the first time, of realizing that the sky above you is alive with movement. As you sit with this image, you feel the balance that has emerged over centuries. Understanding has not replaced wonder. It has refined it. People no longer look up in fear or confusion. They look up with anticipation, curiosity, and respect. The aurora continues to resist ownership. It arrives on its own terms. It leaves without explanation. All observation can do is prepare you to notice it when it chooses to appear. And when it does, you stand quietly beneath it, aware that you are witnessing the visible edge of a vast, ongoing conversation between Earth and space. One that can be studied, anticipated, but never fully controlled. As your awareness settles into this balance between anticipation and acceptance, another truth quietly emerges. The aurora, for all its softness and beauty, is not purely decorative. It is the visible signature of energy interacting with the earth, and energy, when strong enough, always leaves an imprint. You imagine the invisible processes continuing far above, even when the sky appears calm. Streams of charged particles still arrive. Magnetic fields still bend and stretch. Most of the time, these interactions pass unnoticed, absorbed gently by the planet's protective layers. Life below remains undisturbed, unaware of the constant exchange taking place overhead. But on rare occasions, the flow intensifies. When the sun releases especially powerful surges of energy, the interaction with Earth's magnetic environment grows stronger, more strained. The invisible shield that normally guides particles smoothly begins to ripple and shift. These disturbances travel through the magnetic field like waves through water, reaching far beyond the regions where auroras glow. You might not feel anything directly. The ground beneath you remains solid. The air remains still, but systems built upon delicate balances begin to notice. Satellites orbiting high above the Earth experience subtle disruptions. Signals falter. Instruments misread. Technology designed to operate in stable conditions suddenly finds itself in a changing environment. Long before the digital age, People encounter the effects of these magnetic storms in quieter ways. Compasses behaved strangely. Electrical currents appeared where none were expected. Wires hummed faintly with unexplained energy. The sky's beauty carried consequences that were not immediately understood. One historical event stands as a reminder of how powerful these interactions can become. On a night long ago, the aurora reached far beyond its usual boundaries, spilling into skies where it was rarely seen. The glow was so intense that people believed the world itself was on fire. Some read by its light. Others stood in shock, unsure whether dawn had arrived early or catastrophe was unfolding. At the same time, systems designed to carry electrical signals reacted violently. Equipment sparked. Messages transmitted themselves without power. The invisible forces shaping the aurora had reached deep into the structures humans had only just begun to rely upon. You sense how unsettling this must have been, to witness the sky ignite while the tools of communication faltered. The connection between the heavens and human life suddenly felt very real, very immediate. The aurora was no longer distant. It was influential. In the modern world, this influence is even more pronounced. Technology now extends far beyond the surface of the Earth. Satellites guide navigation, communication, and observation. Power grids stretch across continents, finely tuned to operate within narrow limits. When magnetic disturbances ripple through these systems, the effects can cascade. And yet, despite this potential for disruption, fear does not dominate the experience. Instead, awareness grows. Scientists monitor solar activity carefully, watching for signs of increased energy flow. Precautions are taken. Systems are designed with resilience in mind. The aurora becomes not just a wonder to admire, but a signal to respect. There is something humbling about this realization. The same phenomenon that calms the mind and slows the breath also reminds you that the planet exists within a dynamic environment. Earth is not isolated. It is exposed, engaged, responsive. The aurora does not threaten. It reveals. It shows you where the boundaries of stability lie, and how easily they can be tested by forces far beyond human scale. In doing so, it invites a deeper respect for the delicate systems that sustain modern life. As the lights shimmer faintly at the edge of your imagination, you hold both truths at once: beauty and power, calm and consequence. The sky does not choose one over the other. It offers both, quietly, without explanation. And as you breathe slowly, grounded beneath it all, you sense that understanding this balance is part of truly seeing the aurora, not just as light in the sky, but as a reminder of the living relationship between Earth and the star that sustains it. As your awareness expands beyond the familiar horizon of Earth, the question arises almost naturally. If these lights are born from the meeting of a star and a magnetic world, then Earth cannot be the only place where such a dance occurs. You lift your gaze again, this time not just upward, but outward, into a solar system filled with worlds, each carrying its own invisible structures, its own relationship with the sun. You begin to realize that the aurora is not uniquely human, not even uniquely terrestrial. It is a phenomenon written into the physics of space itself. Wherever a planet carries a magnetic field and an atmosphere, and wherever a star sends out streams of charged particles, the conditions for luminous interaction exist. Your thoughts drift first toward the giant worlds farther from the sun, where scale transforms everything. There, magnetic fields stretch far wider than Earth's, enveloping entire systems of moons in invisible force. When solar energy reaches these worlds, it does not merely brush their skies. It ignites vast regions, producing auroras so immense they dwarf anything seen from the ground beneath Earth's poles. These distant lights do not always behave as Earth's do. Some form persistent rings around a planet's poles, glowing steadily rather than flickering. Others pulse rhythmically, driven not only by the sun, but by interactions with nearby moons. The result is a complex web of energy exchange, where planets and satellites participate together in shaping luminous displays. You may notice how this deepens the meaning of what you have already seen. The aurora is no longer an isolated event tied to a single world. It becomes a universal expression, a visible trace of invisible forces at work throughout the cosmos. Light becomes a language spoken wherever magnetic fields and energetic particles meet. In this broader view, Earth's aurora feels both familiar and rare. Familiar because it follows the same principles seen elsewhere. Rare because it unfolds above a world filled with life capable of noticing it, wondering about it, and weaving stories around it. The lights above Earth are not brighter or more powerful than those on other worlds. They are simply witnessed. You imagine standing on a distant moon, looking up at a sky illuminated by enormous arcs of light stretching across alien horizons. There, too, the sky would glow silently, indifferent to observation. There, too, the light would mean nothing until someone looked up and asked why. This realization carries a quiet comfort. The universe is not chaotic noise punctuated by isolated miracles. It is structured, interconnected, governed by principles that repeat themselves across vast distances. The aurora is one of those repeating patterns, a reminder that beauty often emerges from consistency rather than exception. At the same time, this universality does not make the experience feel smaller. It makes it larger. When you watch the northern lights from Earth, you are witnessing a local expression of a cosmic process. The same star-driven energy that paints your sky also touches countless other worlds, each responding in its own way. As you hold this thought, the boundaries between Earth and space soften. The planet beneath your feet feels less like a solitary island and more like a participant in a larger system. Its magnetic field, its atmosphere, its lights, all are part of a shared cosmic environment. The aurora, then, becomes a bridge. It connects the intimate experience of standing beneath a glowing sky with the vast, impersonal workings of the universe. It reminds you that even the most local wonders are shaped by forces that extend far beyond any single world. Above you, somewhere beyond sight, other skies are glowing too. You find yourself returning, gently, to where this journey began, beneath the familiar sky of your own world. After traveling through myth and measurement, through ancient belief and cosmic process, the aurora settles once more into its quiet place above the earth. It has not changed, only your way of seeing it has. The lights appear again in your imagination, slow and deliberate, drifting across the darkness as they always have. But now they carry layers. Within their motion live the echoes of old stories, warriors riding, spirits dancing, foxes running across frozen hills. These images do not vanish simply because you understand the physics behind the glow. They remain softened, woven into memory. At the same time, you are aware of the invisible journey unfolding behind the scenes. You know that this light began at the surface of a distant star, carried across space by streams of energy, guided by fields you cannot see, transformed gently by the thin air high above the planet. You know that the aurora is not intentional, not symbolic by design. It is a consequence, honest, precise, inevitable. And yet, Standing beneath it, the distinction feels less important than you once thought. Human beings have always told stories about the sky, not because the sky demanded it, but because the act of looking upward stirs something deep and quiet within. The aurora simply gave that impulse a canvas. Myth was never a failure of understanding. It was a response to wonder, a way of holding something vast without being overwhelmed by it. Science, in turn, is not a rejection of that impulse. It is its continuation, a different language for the same curiosity. Where myth used metaphor, science uses measurement. Where myth asked who, science asks how. Both begin with the same moment, a human standing still, looking up. You may notice how gently these two ways of seeing can coexist. Knowing the cause of the aurora does not erase its emotional weight. If anything, it deepens it. The light becomes more meaningful when you realize how much had to align for it to appear. The sun's activity, the Earth's inner motion, the fragile balance of the atmosphere. The aurora becomes a reminder that beauty does not require intention. It can emerge naturally from interaction, from structure, from relationship. The universe does not perform for an audience, and yet, sometimes, it produces moments that feel uncannily personal. As the lights stretch across the sky, you feel a quiet sense of belonging. Not ownership, not control, but participation. You're a part of a world that responds to its star, part of a species that notices, remembers, and wonders, part of a long line of observers who have stood in silence beneath the same glowing arcs, separated by centuries, but united by attention. The aurora will continue long after you are gone. It does not depend on memory or meaning to exist. But for as long as someone looks up and pauses, it will also exist as something more than physics. It will be a moment of connection between past and present, between Earth and space, between understanding and awe. The lights begin to fade now, thinning into the darkness, leaving the stars untouched. The sky returns to stillness, as it always does. But the impression lingers, quiet and gentle. And as you let that image soften and drift away, the world around you grows calmer, slower, dimmer. Now, allow your breathing to slow even further. Inhale gently, as if the night air itself were moving through you, cool and weightless. Exhale without effort, letting the day loosen its hold. The images of light and sky begin to blur at the edges, no longer sharp, no longer demanding attention. The aurora fades into memory, becoming less a picture and more a feeling, a sense of quiet motion, a vastness held at a distance that feels safe. You don't need to follow its journey anymore. It continues on its own, far above, far away, without asking anything of you. Your thoughts grow softer now, longer, less defined. The universe does not need to be understood in this moment. It does not need to be explained or explored. It is enough to know that it exists, steady and patient, unfolding whether you watch or rest. The room around you feels heavier, more solid. The surface beneath you offers gentle support. Sounds, if there are any, lose their edges, blending into a low, distant hum. There is nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to go. Somewhere above, the earth continues its quiet exchange with the sun fields bend. Particles move. Light is born and fades again. But here, below it all, you are free to rest. Let the final image dissolve completely. Let darkness become comfortable. Let stillness settle in your chest and limbs. The sky has shared its story. Now it's time to sleep.